In Los Angeles, California, a man attempted to murder two sheriff's deputies. He went up to their vehicle and shot at very close range. For the international audience, a sheriff's deputy is basically a police officer who just has a broader jurisdiction. So some reports say that the shooter was a dwarf, and from looking at the video footage, that was the first thing that I thought. It was either a dwarf or actually a child, but the shooter so far hasn't been apprehended, so we'll see. One of the deputies who was in the car was a 31-year-old mother of a 6-year-old boy. She was shot in the jaw and in the arms. The other deputy was a 24-year-old man who was struck in the forehead, the arm, and the hand. Now, attacks against law enforcement are going to become more common, as it's become more societally acceptable. As, society at large, seemingly, attacks all law enforcement. You have major Democrats who talk about how police are engaged in some kind of, manhunt against black people, for example. The rhetoric against the police is coming from mainstream Democrat figures. And this isn't just, let's change some policies, it's, let's dismantle police departments. The police departments are evil, they're racist, they're villainous in themselves. It's a long shot from let's change the way bail conditions work to let's completely dismantle all law enforcement because we want a nation without laws or something. Then there's people like Joe Biden. In essence, the head of the Democrat Party at the moment, as long as he's their presidential nominee, he jumps to defend the criminal whenever there's a police shooting and tries to make it racial when there's no evidence of it. That's what happened with Jacob Blake, the man who was shot while reaching for a knife in his car. I did a video about that. And it's like, what kind of country doesn't have laws? What kind of country doesn't have law enforcement? I mean, that would be the death of a country, and frankly, that's what they want, is the death of our country. Now, protesters, I'm just going to call them Biden's people, because at this point they really are, and Kamala Harris's people too. After all, Kamala Harris has been involved in funding the bail for some of these rioters.
I know that there are protests still happening in major cities across the United States. I'm just not seeing the reporting on it that I had
that's right.
for the first few weeks.
That's right. But they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. And they're not, this is a movement, I'm telling you. They're not going to stop. And everyone beware, because they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that they're not going to let up, and they should not. And we should not.
Well, they went to the hospital where these deputies were being treated to wish death upon those who had been shot. You couldn't make it up. I mean, these people talk about the indecency, supposedly, of police officers. Police officers don't line up outside of hospitals when somebody gets shot and say, yay, we shot him, let's hope he dies. It's these people, these rioters and Biden people and Kamala Harris people who do. Because they're the people who lack all morality. These Black Lives Matter supposed activists said things like, and I quote, "You're gonna die one by one," unquote. They said that to the police officers and deputies who were standing outside the hospital trying to guard it, trying to prevent these thugs from coming into the emergency room and causing trouble, while the colleagues of these law enforcement were fighting for their lives. At the same time, I saw these protesters saying things like "white bitch" to some of these, white female law enforcement members. Now, remember, supposedly their goal is fighting against racism. How? By being racist? Because anti-white racism is condoned or accepted. It is. That's why you can't say all lives matter, because they don't. Not to these people. White lives don't matter to these people. But yeah, they tried to get into the emergency room. And talking about these different figures on the Democrat left who have encouraged violence against law enforcement in, in some cases more explicit ways than others, the Los Angeles mayor himself, Eric Garcetti, at one point recently called police killers. He was talking about defunding the police department when he said, and I quote, "It starts someplace, and we say we're going to be who we want to be, or we're going to continue being the killers that we are," unquote. The killers that we are, as he talks about defunding the police department. Yeah, it doesn't take much of a stretch to see a connection being made there. And nowadays, frankly, police tend to show extreme restraint. I mean, decades ago, the police would shoot people who were running away from the police, especially after, some kind of a fight, or were threatening police. Now, it wasn't racial, that's just the way that it was handled. Now, these rioters were blocking the ambulance passageway into the hospital. Now, if this was a war, that would be considered a war crime to interfere with the medical help like that. But no, the rioters yelled, "I hope they effing die." That was one of their chants that they took place in outside of the hospital. Just, when you hear from these Democrats about just how moral they are and about how immoral conservatives are, just remember this stuff. Remember the rhetoric, remember what they do trying to block ambulances and trying to get into emergency rooms and celebrating the deaths of police or the attempted murder of police. And the media and the Democrats, they cover for these people. I mean, I can't imagine the praise of college professors for these people. Again, Kamala Harris funded the bail fund and encouraged others to fund the bail fund for these rioters. This is who they really are, and they're finally showing it to us. And frankly, we should listen to who they really are. Wait, if you enjoyed that video, please remember to like and share. I can't grow without you. Also, if you want to be reliably notified of new videos, don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter. If you're able to support the production of these videos, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe at Subscribestar, or maybe get one of the healthier products, or even get some merch.